Hi there, Tim Constable from Portfolio Letting Experts in Bournemouth. So in today's video we're going to talk about the 7 key things that you need to know as a landlord about the Renters Reform Bill. But before we dive into some of the detail, what we first need to understand is what exactly is the Renters Reform Bill, why are they doing it, and how long is it likely to come into play. So the Renters Reform Bill is ultimately they aim to deliver a fairer private rented sector for both landlords and for tenants. So some of the goals of the government are for tenants to have better homes, to empower tenants, for landlords to stay compliant, to resolve issues between the landlords and the tenants, and to support local councils to basically enforce these standards. Okay, so it was first introduced into Parliament on 17th of May 2023, and on average, basically it takes about 12 months for the law to get passed. Okay, so we're looking at that on that basis around May 2024 that this stuff's going to be coming into action. So we need to be prepared and we need to understand what to look out for. So the first thing I want to talk about is basically Section 21. So firstly, to understand what a Section 21 is, it's known as a no-fault eviction. So within the tenancy, okay, you can issue what's called a Section 21, which is basically a notice for the tenant to leave within 2 months of the property, and you do not have to give a reason. So what the government are talking about, and this has been the main headline of the Renters Reform Bill, is that they're going to abolish Section 21s. Okay, so this now means that you will no longer be able to evict a tenant without a reason, which we'll go on to within a later topic. Okay, so part of this as well is also that now you will not be able to have fixed term contracts on your properties. Okay, so normally we would have a 6 or 12 month contract for a property that would rent out. The tenant would have the security that they're going to be in the property 6 or 12 months, and the landlords that would know there's a high likelihood that the tenant's going to stay there for the 6 or 12 month period at least. Okay, so these are now going to be abolished as well, and basically you will only have rolling or periodic contracts. So basically all tenancy contracts will now be, once this bill is passed, on a month-to-month basis. And basically the reason that government are saying that they want to do this is to allow tenants to move out of properties if they have a change of circumstance. So for example, a tenant may have to leave the area for a new job role, so government want to allow tenants to be able to move more freely. Also, another reason that they're talking about doing this, or they will do this, is the fact that if you've got a rogue landlord, then basically the tenants won't be held for this contract if the landlord isn't looking after the property, for example. Okay, there will be some exemptions on the rolling contracts, and a big topic and a big thing of contention has been around student properties, because for all you student landlords out there, we all know it's done usually every August or September that the new students move in, and usually it's rented, up to 12, 9, 6 months in advance. So obviously if a tenant's allowed to give notice because they're only on a rolling contract month by month, that's going to mess up the nature of the student properties. So that's something that the government are addressing, but we haven't got any more details on that at the moment. So basically, the last point on this is also around rent increases. So at the moment, for rent increases, you have to issue what's called a Section 13 and give the tenant just 1 month's notice, okay, for a rent increase. What the new rules the government are going to be introducing are that you're only allowed to do 1 rent increase per year, and you need to give the tenants now 2 months' notice, and you also need to provide evidence that the rent is at market level. So for us, what we will do is we will provide 3 examples of similar properties that are achieving a certain level of rental. Okay, cool. The next thing that you need to be sure about, and moving on to topic 2, is Section 8s. So Section 8s work alongside a Section 21, but a Section 8 essentially is the opposite to the Section 21, where you have to give a specific reason for evicting a tenant. Okay, so this basically gives the authority to the landlord to regain the property under certain conditions. So that's how it differs to Section 21, because you do not have to give a condition. So what's going to happen with the Section 8 is some grounds are going to be amended, okay, and new grounds are going to be created. So basically, one of the positives that I see from these new rules, is that you're going to have stronger reasons to evict people on a Section 8. So, for example, antisocial behaviour will be a ground that you'll be able to use to get a tenant out on a Section 8. And there will also be a new ground for repeated rent arrears. So the devil's going to be in the detail, but what the understanding is that if a tenant falls into over 2 months arrears 3 times. So topic 3 is there's going to be a new ombudsman for landlords specifically, because at the moment one does not exist in England. It does exist in Wales and Scotland, but it doesn't exist in England. And there is an ombudsman for agents at the moment, but not specifically for landlords. So even if you have an agent, you will still need to be part of this new property ombudsman, and obviously there will be a fee attached to it. So what the ombudsman will be able to do is help local councils enforce action and banding orders. So there's going to be fines of up to 25,000 for landlords. You'll also they'll be able to make you do remedial actions. But one thing the ombudsman won't be available for landlords is you won't be able to complain about tenants. But they are talking about having a mediation service for the ombudsman to act between the landlord and the tenant to try and resolve issues. So the fourth thing that I want to talk about is a property portal for landlords. So what they're going to do is create a centralised and digital overview of landlords and their properties across England. So this is going to be a legal requirement for all landlords, and it's going to support enforcement measures. So for example, rogue landlords will be marked as landlords that have got banning orders, enforcement actions against them on the database, and tenants, when they're going to rent properties, will be able to search in this database to check if their landlord is ultimately a good landlord and they should rent from them. Also on the property portal, landlords, when they're registered, will have a unique ID, and they'll also need to set themselves as either active or inactive. And active will basically just mean that you can market, advertise and let your properties. And if you're set as inactive, it will mean that you can't market, let or advertise your properties. And they're talking about there will be fines if the database isn't updated accordingly. So the fifth thing I want to talk about is pets and lets. So at the moment, it's at the landlord's discretion whether you want to accept pets or not. And around at the moment, 7% of all properties advertised are pet friendly. So it's a really, really small amount of properties that are advertised as pet friendly. The new rules they're talking about are implementing that any tenant that wants to get a pet can request in writing to the landlord, and the landlord has to give what is a reasonable explanation to refuse the request. So we don't have any details at the moment of what is reasonable, and obviously the devil is in the detail, so we'll need to understand what is reasonable. But the landlord's going to have 42 days to respond to the request. If they need more information, the landlord, then they can have another 7 days. And if the tenant and the landlord disagree, the tenant will be able to go to the new property ombudsman that will exist. One thing that they have talked about doing, which is really important, is that generally when a landlord has a deposit and there's a dispute, sometimes the deposit isn't even covered. So if you add a pet in, which is an extra risk, maybe the pet damages the property and it's not covered, then you won't be able to get the money back. So what they've agreed is that, or what they've suggested is that there is going to be, the tenants can be permitted to pay a fee to basically insure damage for the pets. So there'll be a specialist pet insurance or a pet insurance, and the tenants will be permitted to pay for this insurance basically. So you will be covered there. The sixth thing I want to talk about is the decent home standard. So basically this has already been coming in and it's just evolving over time, but basically it's to improve the overall standard of homes. So the sixth thing that I want to talk about is the decent home standard, and this is basically about to improve the overall standard of homes and who you are and aren't allowed to rent to. So at the moment it's at landlord's discretion if they want to rent to families with children or potentially families on benefits or people on benefits. And what they're talking about is making this you're not allowed to have the choice anymore. You won't be able to discriminate against people with children or people on benefits, which in my opinion might become a little tricky for some landlords. The seventh thing and last thing that I want to talk about is enforcements and penalties. So with a lot of these new pieces of legislation, they're actually going to be empowering the local councils to really they're going to be empowering the local councils with more funding and ultimately getting more people and more staff to be able to enforce these penalties and make sure that people are doing the right thing. So currently at the moment, there's £30,000 penalties, there's banning orders, there's extended rent repayment orders. They've just reformed the HMO licenses in 2018, and they're funding local councils to enforce this. But now they're going to provide even more funding to empower councils. They're going to provide even more funding to empower councils, and the landlords will be fined if they break certain rules on the bills. So, for example, if they can potentially get a £30,000 fine if they serve a Section 8 and the wrong ground on the Section 8 for eviction that they are not entitled to use. So another thing they're looking to do is if you market or relet a property within 3 months of you evicting a tenant because you said you wanted to sell it, then they're looking at really clamping down on that. I hope you found these 7 key things really helpful with the Renters Reform Bill, and if you think it was valuable to you, please share it with anyone that you think it might be useful for, because it's really important that as landlords and agents we all stick together, especially when the government are making it so much more difficult for us to just provide a nice place for people to live. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next one.